Stop using race to divide people. Stop weaponizing caste as if it's an eternal biological prison. Stop looking across the border and seeing a stranger. Because the deepest, most revolutionary genetic investigation ever conducted into the people of South Asia has just delivered a verdict that shatters those illusions. Your blood, your bones, the very code inside every cell of your body, contains a 10,000-year-old secret, and what it reveals is not the story of purity and separation you've been told. It's a story of fusion, a story of a lost civilization, a ghost population, and a series of ancient migrations so profound, so unexpected, that they've remained hidden until now. If your family comes from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or Sri Lanka, this is not just history. This is your hidden identity finally revealed. We are about to take you on a breathtaking journey back through time, to the very origins of the Indian people, and the truth is far more spectacular than the myths. The story we were told was simple, comfortable, and absolute. For generations, textbooks and political narratives painted a picture of ancient India as a land of eternal, isolated purity. The great civilizations of the Indus Valley and the Vedic Age were portrayed as indigenous products, springing fully formed from the subcontinent's soil, untouched by outside hands. The dividing lines of language, religion, and caste were projected backward, imagined as permanent features of the landscape, as fixed as the Himalayas. Think about how that narrative felt, a sense of timeless belonging, of a lineage unbroken by foreign tides, a pedigree stretching back to the very dawn of civilization. The narrative was that certain groups were always here, in a specific order, and that the DNA of a modern Indian is a direct, unbroken link to a single, geographically sealed past. But this story was a fragile illusion, held together by a lack of data. It was a beautiful, serene painting hanging on a wall, and no one had yet tapped the surface to discover it was covering a colossal, intricate mural beneath. What nobody realized, what nobody could have known, was that buried beneath the dusty plains of Haryana, in the ancient skeleton of a woman who died 4,600 years ago, was a time bomb. A truth that was waiting to completely annihilate the old certainties and replace them with a far more complex and magnificent puzzle. The first domino fell with the sequencing of her genome, and the ripples are still crashing through our understanding of who we are. The discovery began not with a triumphant shout, but with a painstaking whisper from the soil of Rakhigarhi. This is no ordinary archaeological site. It's one of the largest known metropolises of the Indus Valley civilization, a Bronze Age superpower that flourished with breathtaking urban planning, sophisticated drainage, and a script we still haven't deciphered. Imagine walking those streets 4,500 years ago, the scent of baking bread from communal ovens, the murmur of traders in a language we can no longer understand, the cool splash of water from a private well in a neatly laid out courtyard. For decades, the identity of its people was a black box. We had their bricks, their seals bearing the images of unicorns and meditating yogis, and their enigmatic writing, but we didn't have them. That all changed when a team led by archaeologist Vasant Shinde and geneticist Vagish Narasimhan managed to do what had never been done before: extract and sequence usable DNA from a skeleton found in the heart of this ancient city. The task was Herculean. In the hot, humid climate of the Indian subcontinent, DNA degrades rapidly, consumed by bacteria, and ravaged by water, turning biological matter into a chemical soup over millennia. But within the petrous bone of her inner ear, one of the densest vaults of the human body, a microscopic trace of her genetic essence persisted. The skeleton, designated I6113, belonged to a woman who lived, breathed, and walked the streets of Rakhigarhi between 2800 and 2300 BCE. She predated the pyramids of Giza. She was a citizen of the world's most mysterious civilization at its peak. And when the data from her genome finally resolved on the computer screens at the Reich lab at Harvard University, the first thing the scientists felt wasn't just excitement, it was vertigo. They were staring at a genetic profile that made no sense according to the traditional story. It was a chimera, a perfect blend of two worlds that, until that moment, no one had definitively linked. The first ancestral component in the Rakhigarhi woman was something truly ancient and indigenous, a lineage of hunter-gatherers who had been on the subcontinent for almost unfathomable lengths of time. This was the first half of her identity, the first Indians. But the second half was the shockwave. It was unmistakably linked to the early farmers of the Iranian plateau, a genetic signature from the Zagros Mountains, over 1,000 kilometers to the west. Here was a Bronze Age woman, living in the heart of the Indus Valley, and she was already a fusion of these two deeply divergent human lineages. There was no third ingredient. The discovery was so staggering because of what it lacked. Despite the Vedic cultural importance of the horse and chariot, despite the linguistic link between North India and Europe, this Indus Valley woman had zero-step ancestry. The Yamnaya pastoralists, the wagon-driving, horse-herding peoples from the Pontic-Caspian steppe who had already swept into Europe and transformed its genetic landscape, had not yet arrived. This single woman's DNA was a snapshot of a lost world, a pre-Vedic India that no one had ever seen genomically. She was the proof that the Indus Valley civilization was not a Vedic civilization in its genetic formation. She was the ghost in the machine, and her message was clear. The story of you is a layer cake, and the first two layers were already in place before the classical Indian world was even a glimmer on the horizon. To understand the evidence she presented, we must break down the raw science, because the data from Rakhigarhi and hundreds of other ancient individuals doesn't just suggest a new model. It screams it with statistical force. The Rakhigarhi woman's genome was a 50-50 to 60-40 mix of those two foundational groups. Let that fraction land. She wasn't an anomaly, she was a perfect representative of a long-established, stable, mixed population. The first, the indigenous half, represents the most profound mystery of all. This is the ancient ancestral South Indian lineage, or ASI. You need to let the timeline of this sink in. Geneticists can measure how long ago a population branch point occurred by looking at the rate of random mutations that accumulate over millennia, like errors that creep into a manuscript copied 10,000 times. When they do this for the ASI lineage, the numbers become mind-bending. The ancestors of the ASI split from all other major Eurasian populations more than 40,000, possibly 50,000 years ago. To give you a frame of reference, the ancestors of modern Europeans and East Asians hadn't even fully diverged from each other at that point. They were still a single, closely related population somewhere in the vastness of Central Asia. But the ASI forebears were already a distinct, independent line, a separate tribe of humanity walking their own solitary path into the unknown. The first Indians were among the earliest, most isolated branches of humanity to pioneer the out-of-Africa expansion, venturing along the coast of the Arabian Sea and into the lush, teeming subcontinent, while much of the north was still locked in ice. Picture this journey: small bands of people moving along a coastline now drowned by 100 meters of sea level rise, gathering shellfish, hunting game in a landscape of strange new trees and unfamiliar animals, leaving behind not monuments, but the faintest scatter of stone tools that archaeologists still argue over today. They were not related closely to any living population outside of South Asia. Some early studies tried to use the isolated Ongj people of the Andaman Islands as a proxy, but even that is imperfect. The Ongji are a sister group, a tiny, drifted island population that branched off from an early East Eurasian lineage. The ASI of the mainland were their own vast, diverse, and now genetically extinct ghost population. Think of a great river that once split into 100 channels, each flowing through a different landscape, and then all but one vanished under the sand of time. There is no pure ASI individual alive today to study. They exist only as echoes, as ghosts in the genetic code of every single modern South Asian, from the Himalayas to the Comorin coast. Their deep, ancient, and unique branches of mitochondrial DNA, haplogroups like the vast M lineage, and deep R and U2 subclades, still dominate the maternal ancestry of the subcontinent, a silent matrilineal anthem proving the resilience of the first mothers. The Rakhigarhi woman's own mtDNA, U2B2, is a classic, deeply indigenous South Asian marker, virtually absent outside the subcontinent today. These first Indians were not a footnote, they are the foundational canvas upon which every subsequent brushstroke was painted. They are the reason why, when you sequence a modern Indian, the deepest, oldest genetic signal doesn't point to a farm in Iran or a horse on a steppe. It points to a primordial, indigenous South Asian homestead. So, if the first layer was ASI, the second layer, which created the Indus Valley people, was a seismic event that began not with an invasion, but with a slow, transformative migration of people from the Iranian plateau. Why did they come? What compelled them to leave the familiar folds of the Zagros Mountains, with their oak forests and ancient pastoral traditions, and push east into the unknown? The answer likely lies in climate, and the eternal human search for new pastures and fertile soil. Sometime between 9,000 and 6,000 years ago, a period of climatic amelioration stabilized the region, making the alluvial plains of the Indus more accessible. Before the cities of the Indus had even risen from the mud, herders and early agriculturalists from the Zagros region, carrying a genetic signature we call Iranian farmer-related ancestry, moved east. They didn't come as conquerors erasing what they found. The genetic evidence shows a complex, prolonged process of admixture and coexistence. Picture not a battle line, but a slow interweaving of lifeways at the edges of villages, at seasonal campsites, at ancient crossroads where different groups met to trade stories, tools, and eventually, to share hearths and bloodlines. We know this because the DNA of 11 outlier individuals from archaeological sites far to the west of Rakhigarhi, in Shari Sokhta in eastern Iran, and Gonur Depe in the Bimak culture of Bronze Age Turkmenistan, provided the crucial corroboration. These 11 individuals, dated to between 3100 and 2200 BCE, were genetic anomalies in their own regions. Their DNA was a mix of the same two components: Iranian farmer-related ancestry and substantial Aussie ancestry. They were not locals in eastern Iran. They were migrants, almost certainly traders from the Indus Valley civilization itself, living and dying on the peripheries of their commercial network. Perhaps merchants who traveled with caravans of lapis lazuli and carnelian beads, who fell ill and were buried in the foreign soil of a distant trading outpost. They are our Indus periphery proxy, and their genomes are the key that unlocked the identity of the Rakhigarhi woman. The Y chromosomes found among these Indus periphery males are a forensic catalog of pre-steppe India. They carried lineages like H1A1D2, J2A, L1A, and R2A. You need to pay attention to what is conspicuously, thunderously absent from this list. There is no R1A. The R1A Z93 haplogroup, which today is a badge of honor for many high caste and northern Indian communities, which some narratives have claimed marks the very essence of the Indo-Aryan, is completely missing. This is the smoking gun of negative evidence. The pre-steppe Indian man, the builder of the Indus cities, did not carry what would become the most celebrated paternal lineage in the region. He carried older, deeper local lines. R2A, for instance, is a brother lineage to R1A, and its presence in these pre-steppe samples shows it was already a native son of the subcontinent, a lineage that had likely been there since the initial fusion of Iranian farmers and Aussie foragers. These men built a world without horses, without chariots, without the Sanskritic gods, and for 1,000 years their civilization hummed along the rhythms of a different drum. The Indus Valley civilization was, genetically speaking, a product of its own complex pre-Aryan world. It was a fusion civilization, a biological and cultural synthesis of West and South that was already ancient by the time its first cities were laid out on a grid. But a burning, unspoken question loomed over this entire genetic model. What about the Indo-Aryan languages? What about the Vedas and the Sanskritic roots spoken by over 1 billion people today? If the Indus Valley wasn't Vedic, then where did the third layer, the steppe ancestry, come from? The evidence shifts north and forward in time, to the mountains of what is now northern Pakistan's Swat Valley. It's a landscape of cool, pine-scented air and terraced fields, a historic gateway between the plains and the high passes of Central Asia. There, in the Swat proto-historic grave-type sites, dated from 1200 to 800 BCE, we finally see the genome we had been waiting for. The Spijing individuals are a three-way mix. They carry the same ancient Indus Valley blend of Iranian farmer-related and Aussie ancestry, the genetic legacy of the great Bronze Age cities now fading or collapsed. But now, a third component is unmistakably present. It's the genetic signature of the Central Steppe, closely linked to the Santashta culture, a chariot warrior society that flourished on the Eurasian plains around 2000 BCE, dwelling in fortified circular settlements, perfecting the art of bronze metallurgy, and burying their elite dead with the most revolutionary weapon of their age, the spoke-wheeled chariot. This culture was itself a cousin to the Yamnaya. This steppe ancestry, which ranges from 0 to 30% in modern South Asians, didn't just trickle in. It arrived as a detectable, directional pulse. The Y chromosome data from this period is the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. In the Swat Valley after 1000 BCE, we suddenly see the explosive appearance of a brand new paternal line, R1A Z93. It wasn't there before. Now, it was dominant. This tells a story not of a wholesale population replacement, but of a specific, culturally impactful migration. A group of male-dominant, steppe-derived people entered the subcontinent, bringing with them their language, their rituals, their horses, and their DNA. They integrated themselves into a post-Indus Valley landscape that had already been shaped by thousands of years of prior civilization. How did this integration happen? Was it a slow, competitive process of elite dominance, where local leaders adopted the prestigious new language and ritual system, sealing the deal through marriage alliances with steppe clans? The DNA suggests so. They mixed with the local population, and in this process, their language, the ancestor of Vedic Sanskrit, eventually became the dominant cultural force in the north, spreading along routes of trade and elite dominance, while the deep, native Aussie and Iranian farmer maternal and paternal lineages never disappeared. The steppe people did not form India. They were one of the three great components that formed India. And this genetic revelation fundamentally recalibrates the scale of influence. Modern population statistics hammer this home. Even in groups that historically claim the purest steppe descent, like the Jats or Roars of the Northwest, the actual steppe genetic component tops out at around 20 to 30%. The rest is that same ancient Indus Valley mixture. In vast swaths of the east and south of India, steppe ancestry dwindles to less than 5%. And in many tribal and lower caste communities, it is a near-zero biological whisper. But the first Indian Aussie ancestry does the opposite. It remains the single largest common denominator, reaching levels of 60 to 70% in many communities across the south and center. There is no modern Indian whose ancestors were not here before the Vedas were composed. And that is the genetic revelation that must change how we see ourselves. The implications of this cascade of evidence are so profound that they rewrite not just the history of a region, but the personal identity of over 1.5 billion people. First, it completely destroys any biological basis for purity. Every modern South Asian, without exception, is a mix of at least these three deeply divergent ancient populations: the indigenous Aussie hunter-gatherer, the West Asian Iranian farmer, and the Central Asian steppe pastoralist. Your ancestors were the first human beings to arrive on these shores, the pioneering agriculturalists who crossed a plateau to build a civilization, and the later migrants who brought a new tongue and sacred fire. You are the living synthesis of tens of thousands of years of human meetings, unions, conflicts, and compromises. The caste system, when viewed through this genetic lens, is revealed not as an eternal hierarchy of separate origins, but as a relatively recent, endogamous social fence erected upon a previously more fluid genetic field. How did this fence go up? Around 100 generations ago, a tectonic shift occurred in Indian society. Perhaps driven by the solidification of Vedic social theory, perhaps by the rise of new political entities, the choice of a spouse began to be confined to a narrow, closed circle. Studies on modern DNA have shown that for the last 2,000 years, approximately, many groups within India began to marry strictly within their own communities. This process, called endogamy, acted like a genetic magnifying glass. It didn't create ancient separations, but it took the existing shared mixture and, by forcing it through countless narrow bottlenecks over 2 millennia, created the illusion of deep, separate origins, because traits and local genetic patterns became amplified in isolated pockets. But when you lift the lid of the last 2 millennia and look at the deep time of the last 10,000 years, you see the shared, common foundation. A Brahmin from Uttar Pradesh and a Dalit from Tamil Nadu, when stripped back to their deep ancestry, are not drawn from separate species. They share the same grand mosaic. The Brahmin carries more steppe Y DNA, a testament to a specific, historical, male-mediated migration pattern that associated certain paternal lines with priestly status. The Dalit carries more Aussie ancestry, a testament to those indigenous communities that remained more resiliently in place, less genetically penetrated by the later, male-driven waves. But they share the same Iranian farmer ancestors. They share the same Aussie foremothers. The genetic distance between these two individuals is a matter of proportion within a common pool, not a matter of separate origins. They are, biologically, branches of a single, ancient Indian family tree, a family that has cruelly, and quite recently in biological terms, been taught to despise its own limbs. This leads us directly to the most charged revelation of all, the decoupling of the Harappan and Vedic civilizations. For a century, a debate has raged over whether the Indus Valley civilization was Aryan or Dravidian. The DNA from Rakhigarhi, as analyzed by the team of Vasant Shinde, Vagish Narasimhan, and David Reich, provides a definitive, scientific resolution. It was neither, in a genetic or likely linguistic sense. It was a pre-Aryan, pre-Vedic culture formed from the deep mixture of the first Indians and early Iranian-related peoples. The steppe ancestry that anchors the Indo-Aryan language migration arrived, according to the hard data, after the decline of the Great Bronze Age cities. Think about the Vedas, their hymns to a dawn, Ushas, their invocations of a fire god, Agni, their verses about a thunder-wielding hero, Indra, smashing the forts of the Dasa. For decades, these verses were superimposed onto the crumbling ruins of Mohenjo-Daro. But the DNA says, no, those ruins were the remnants of a separate, genetically distinct world. The Vedas were likely not composed in the shadow of the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, but in the rural, post-urban landscape of a later India. As the memories of those cities crumbled into myth, their very bricks becoming part of the imagined landscape of a lost, golden age. This is not a diminishment of Vedic culture. It is a recontextualization. It means the Vedic people were inheritors, not originators, of India's first urban miracle. They built their own equally powerful intellectual and literary civilization upon the ruins and the absorbed populations of an older one. The lost civilization is not a myth, but its genetic torchbearers were its direct descendants, still living on the land, who then blended with a new wave of arrivals. The continuity of material culture, the pottery, the farming tools, the everyday life, between the late Harappan era and the subsequent early historic period, suddenly makes perfect sense. The people mostly stayed. Their names for everyday things, their methods of farming, their local arts, likely persisted through the language shift. The language and the elite paternal lines underwent a transformation. What this means for you, the viewer, is that your identity is a palimpsest, a parchment written over multiple times, but where the oldest, deepest inscriptions never fully fade. For expert corroboration, we don't need to speculate. The scientists who led these studies, whose words carry the weight of the peer-reviewed journals, Cell and Science, have stated the case with an unprecedented clarity that leaves no room for the old myths. Vagish Narasimhan, co-senior author of the major Science paper that analyzed 523 ancient genomes from South and Central Asia, summarized the finding with a bluntness that reverberated through the field. The data shows, he explained, that the steppe ancestry that connects South Asia to Europe arrived later, providing a simple, if stark, genetic correlate for the Indo-Aryan language dispersal in India. He wasn't couching it in terms of speculation. He was stating a direct, testable observation. The Indus periphery samples are pre-steppe. The Swat Valley samples are the hinge point, the very moment of arrival visible in the bone. The modern population is the result of the mixing that followed. David Reich, whose lab at Harvard has been the epicenter of the ancient DNA revolution, has been even more explicit about the challenge this poses to the politicized narratives of origins. He has written about the uncomfortable silence that follows his lectures, the flinching from the raw data by those with a stake in older nationalist stories. He noted that his team's training in moving genes, not pots, in focusing strictly on the biomolecular hard drive of history, sometimes clashes with the political uses of the past in the present. But the data, he insists, is unambiguous. It points to multiple migrations and a composite heritage, a reality that is often at odds with narratives of singular, primordial purity. And Professor Vasant Shinde, the archaeologist who directed the Rakhigarhi dig for years, made the most emotional and historically significant declaration. For him, an Indian archaeologist unearthing the first successful genome of his own ancient ancestors, the finding that the Rakhigarhi woman lacked steppe ancestry was definitive proof that the Vedic culture was a later development. Furthermore, the discovery that the genome was a mix of indigenous and Iranian ancestry, he said, settled another long-standing debate, proving that the Harappans were the direct ancestors of a large proportion of modern populations, and that the ancient roots of India are fundamentally anchored in the native Aussie hunter-gatherers and the Iranian migrants who came so long ago. The experts are not whispering, they are shouting through the data. Your ancestors were a fusion of migrants and indigenous pioneers, and this fusion was the engine of all that followed. The resolution to this 10,000-year mystery is not a tidy, comfortable ending. It is a profound, beautiful, and humbling origin story that belongs to all of us. The first Indians, those Aussie hunter-gatherers who walked into the subcontinent more than 50,000 years ago, were not a primitive footnote. They are the deep, resonant bass note of the South Asian symphony, the ghost population whose unique genetic signature is the single most unifying thread in the entire region's biology. They are the reason a tribal group in Kerala and a Kashmiri Pandit are more closely related to each other than either is to anyone else on the planet. Then, beginning perhaps 9,000 years ago, a new people bearing Iranian farmer ancestry arrived, not with the clashing of swords, but with the seeds of wheat and barley, setting the stage for the agricultural surplus that would power the world's largest Bronze Age civilization. The Indus Valley was their child, a hybrid giant that synthesized Western crops and Eastern genes into a unique and magnificent culture. Its streets were not the silent, dusty ruins we see today, but a cacophony of languages, a swirl of trade goods from a dozen lands, a visual testament to the power of mixing. And finally, around 4,000 years ago, a third pulse of history's heartbeat brought the steppe pastoralists from Central Asia, whose arrival on the post-Harappan scene injected new linguistic and cultural energies, contributing to the complex tapestry of the classical Indian world, but never erasing the deep, vibrant fabric that was already there. The modern Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, and Sri Lankan is the product of all three. Not one, not two, all three. The divisions we cling to are shallow social creases on a deep, unified geology of blood. The next time you look in a mirror, see not just a citizen of a modern nation, or a member of a specific community, but see a time traveler. See the daughter of an Indus trader in your eyes. See the son of a first Indian hunter walking a monsoon-soaked forest in your bones. See the fire of a steppe ritual in your spirit. You are the resolution of a mystery that science has finally unlocked. A mystery that reveals not your separation from others on this land, but your unbreakable, 10,000-year-old unity with them. This is not just history. This is your DNA, finally telling you the truth. If this revelation reshaped how you see your own identity, then share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe now, because the next chapter of this ancient story is even more explosive, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Thanks for staying until the very end. Goodbye for now.